The wedding bells fell silent in Campinas when she disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a devastated groom. 13 years of searching, 13 years of uncertainty, until the horrific truth finally emerged from the shadows. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. November in Campinas always brings a peculiar heaviness to the air, mingled with the sweet perfume of jacaranda trees and bougainvillea that paint the city in vibrant purples and pinks. On this particular afternoon, in the upscale neighborhood of Cambuí, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The Duarte family home buzzed with activity as Helena Duarte Martins sat before her vanity mirror, watching her mother Teresa gently place a delicate floral hairpin among her dark curls. "Just a few more hours," Teresa whispered, her eyes meeting her daughter's in the reflection. Helena smiled back, her normally steady hands trembling slightly with excitement. At 27, Helena had always been the picture of organization and efficiency. Her colleagues at Novatec Sistemas in Taquaral often joked that she could schedule rainfall if given the chance. The administrative assistant had meticulously planned every detail of this day for months. From the hand-calligraphed invitations to the exact shade of cream for the table linens at the reception. Outside the bedroom window, cars began lining the street as early guests arrived. Helena's cousin carried in a massive arrangement of white orchids, nearly stumbling over the family cat in her enthusiasm. In the kitchen, aunts argued good-naturedly over the proper way to arrange the traditional Brazilian sweets they'd prepared as pre-ceremony treats. "Has anyone heard from Ricardo?" Helena asked, glancing at her smartphone for the dozenth time that hour. Her fiancé, Ricardo Menezes Sampaio, had sent a simple message earlier. "Can't wait to see you walking toward me." The union between Helena and Ricardo had become something of a sensation in their social circle. He came from one of Campinas' oldest families, his position as a civil engineer at a prestigious firm, cementing his status in the community. Their engagement announcement had made the social pages of the local newspaper, describing them as the perfect match of heart and ambition. What nobody in the bustling house could possibly know was that in less than 5 hours, the carefully arranged flowers would wilt untouched. The champagne would warm in its bottles. The carefully selected music would never play its first note. "Your final fitting is at 3, Teresa reminded her daughter, checking her wristwatch. "Marcelo offered to drive you since I'm still waiting for the photographer." Helena nodded, gathering her things. Marcelo Cunha had been a family friend for years, always reliable, always present at important moments. She grabbed her white shoes, specially dyed to match her gown, and headed downstairs to meet him. As she waved goodbye to her mother, neither could have imagined this would be the last time they would see each other. The morning had been filled with laughter and champagne toasts as Helena Duarte Martins prepared for her special day. At 11:30, she kissed her mother Teresa on the cheek and announced she was heading to Madame Cecilia's boutique for her final dress fitting. "I'll be back in an hour," she promised, grabbing her purse and the white shoes she'd be wearing down the aisle. No one thought twice when she slipped into the black sedan that Ricardo had bought her as an engagement gift just months earlier. 1 hour passed, then 2. By 2 o'clock, Teresa's calls went straight to voicemail. By 3, panic had set in. The wedding was scheduled for 6, and the bride had vanished without a trace. She wouldn't just leave, Teresa insisted, her voice breaking as she called Ricardo. The groom arrived within minutes, his face pale with worry. "This isn't like her at all," he said, pacing the living room floor. "Helena is the most reliable person I know." By nightfall, the wedding guests had been informed of a postponement, though whispers spread quickly through Cambuí. Police officers from the 3rd Precinct arrived, but their questions seemed perfunctory. "Cold feet," one officer muttered, when he thought no one could hear. The boutique owner confirmed Helena had never arrived for her appointment. Her vehicle was nowhere to be found. Security cameras near the Martins family home showed her driving away, but nothing more. She planned everything to the last detail. Marcelo Cunha told reporters, his face a mask of concern. The family friend had been helping with wedding arrangements for months. Helena was counting the days until she became Mrs. Sampaio. Eduardo Alves, Helena's former boyfriend, was among the first people questioned. "We ended things years ago," he said, shifting uncomfortably under Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa's gaze. "Why would I know anything about this?" By the second day, local newspapers had already coined the phrase that would haunt Campinas for years, the runaway bride. Headlines speculated about cold feet, secret lovers, and hidden debts. The stories painted Helena as flighty and dramatic, descriptions that made Teresa throw the newspaper across the room in anger. "My daughter did not run away," she insisted to anyone who would listen. "Something happened to her." Ricardo stood by the family, his eyes hollow with sleeplessness. "I know Helena," he whispered during a candlelight vigil 3 days after her disappearance. "She wouldn't leave without saying goodbye." As days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder. Had she fled from a marriage she secretly dreaded? Or had something far more sinister befallen the bride-to-be on what should have been the happiest day of her life? The first 24 hours after Helena Duarte Martins vanished were critical, but the response from Campinas law enforcement was frustratingly inadequate. When Teresa Duarte arrived at the 3rd Police Precinct, panic etched across her face. She was met with indifference. Officer Paulo Mendonça, a veteran with 20 years on the force, barely looked up from his paperwork. "Young women often get cold feet before weddings," he said, sliding a form across the desk. "She'll probably call tomorrow from a friend's house." The precinct was severely understaffed that November weekend, with 3 officers handling what would normally require 10. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa wasn't even assigned to the case until the following day, by which time crucial evidence had already been compromised. "We should have treated it as a potential abduction from the start," Mauricio would later admit in his case notes. "Instead, we followed standard procedure for voluntary disappearances, which meant waiting 48 hours before launching a full investigation." Ricardo Menezes Sampaio, still dressed in his wedding attire, paced the precinct's faded linoleum floor until midnight, begging officers to take action. His desperation fell on deaf ears. The authorities suggested Helena had simply changed her mind about marriage, a theory that ignored her character completely. "My daughter would never do this," Teresa insisted, clutching Helena's framed photograph. "Something terrible has happened to her." By the time search parties were organized, rain had washed away potential evidence along the route to the dress shop. Security camera footage that might have captured Helena's last movements was automatically erased after 24 hours at several businesses. The white sedan spotted near the boutique remained unidentified for months. Marcelo Cunha, appearing concerned and supportive, volunteered to coordinate civilian search efforts, effectively positioning himself to monitor and potentially sabotage the investigation from within. His presence comforted the family, who had no reason to suspect their trusted friend. The local newspaper ran a small story on page 5. "Bride disappears before wedding, family concerned." The casual tone reflected the police's initial assessment that Helena had simply fled pre-wedding jitters. As the crucial 48-hour mark passed, Teresa collapsed from exhaustion and stress. Ricardo's eyes had grown hollow, his voice hoarse from repeating Helena's description to indifferent officers. "Those first 2 days," Mauricio would later testify, "were our greatest failure. We treated a potential crime as a personal matter, and that decision haunted this case for 13 years. For Helena's loved ones, each passing hour without answers stretched like an eternity, their pain amplified by the knowledge that vital time and possibly their last chance to find her alive was slipping away through institutional indifference. 2 months after Helena's disappearance, a jogger discovered a white shoe partially hidden among the tall grass along the old road to Valinhos. The shoe, a delicate satin pump with a modest heel, matched the description of what Helena Duarte Martins had been wearing when she left for her final dress fitting. This discovery sent ripples through the investigation that had grown increasingly stagnant. Teresa Duarte rushed to the police station when she heard the news. Her eyes filled with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. "That's my daughter's," she confirmed, her voice breaking as she held the muddied shoe. "She was wearing these when she left that morning." The discovery immediately challenged the prevailing runaway bride narrative. If Helena had willingly fled, why would her shoe be found discarded on a remote stretch of road? Detective Maurizio Ferreira Costa examined the evidence with renewed interest. Noting that the location was far from any bus station or taxi stand where someone planning an escape might go. This suggests something more concerning, the detective told his colleagues at the 3rd Precinct, his brow furrowed with worry. The condition and location of this item points to a struggle or forced removal. Yet even this compelling evidence was met with institutional skepticism. Senior officers, already overwhelmed with cases and reluctant to admit their initial assessment might have been wrong, suggested the shoe could have been planted to mislead investigators. One lieutenant openly theorized that Helena herself might have discarded it to create a false trail. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio, still reeling from his fiancée's disappearance, drove to the site daily, searching the surrounding area for any additional clues. The civil engineer's methodical mind couldn't accept that a single shoe was all that remained of the woman he loved. His dedication only intensified the whispers. Was his behavior driven by genuine concern or guilt? Throughout Campinas, conversations in cafes and markets inevitably turned to the mystery. The city, usually preoccupied with its own daily rhythms, found itself collectively invested in Helena's fate. Was this an abduction by unknown assailants? Or had someone close to her orchestrated a meticulously staged disappearance? The Martins family remained steadfast in their conviction. "My daughter would never abandon us without a word," Teresa insisted to anyone who would listen. "Something happened to her, something terrible, and that shoe proves it." As winter settled over the region, the white satin pump became both a symbol of hope and despair, tangible proof that Helena hadn't simply vanished into thin air, but also a grim reminder that wherever she was likely not there by choice. 3 months after Helena Duarte Martins vanished, Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa received a call that would change everything. A small golden earring, shaped like a crescent moon, had been discovered in Ricardo Menezes Sampaio's vehicle. Not just anywhere in the car, it was tucked away in the glove compartment, as if deliberately hidden. "It was her favorite," Teresa Duarte whispered when shown the piece of jewelry. Her hands trembled as she confirmed what the police already suspected. Helena wore these on special occasions. She was saving them for the wedding day. The discovery sent shockwaves through Campinas. Overnight, Ricardo transformed from grieving fiancé to prime suspect. The civil engineer, once respected throughout the community, found himself under intense scrutiny. Neighbors who had previously offered condolences now closed their doors when they saw him approaching. "I don't know how it got there," Ricardo insisted during questioning at the 3rd Police Precinct. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Someone must have planted it. I would never hurt Helena." But the damage was done. Local newspapers that had previously labeled Helena the runaway bride now ran headlines questioning Ricardo's involvement. Speculation ran wild. Perhaps the wedding had been a facade, concealing a relationship that had turned dangerous. Former colleagues at his engineering firm began distancing themselves. "He always seemed possessive," one anonymous coworker told reporters, outside the Taquaral office building where Ricardo had once commanded respect. "Always checking his phone, always needing to know where she was." The Martins family, who had initially embraced Ricardo as one of their own, now regarded him with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. Teresa refused to speak with him directly, communicating only through Marcelo Cunha, who had become the family's unofficial spokesperson and support system during the crisis. "We just want the truth," Marcelo told reporters, his arm protectively around Teresa's shoulders. "If Ricardo knows something, he needs to come forward now." Eduardo Alves, watching the developments from a distance, felt a strange mixture of vindication and guilt. The pressure on Ricardo was relentless, from police, from media, from neighbors who whispered behind his back at the local bakery. Within weeks, the engineer had lost his position at the firm. His apartment in Cambuí became a prison, with reporters camping outside and neighbors documenting his comings and goings. The psychological toll was evident in his appearance. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, a shadow of the confident professional who had once planned a future with Helena. What no one realized was that the earring was just the beginning, the first carefully placed piece in a puzzle designed to destroy Ricardo's life. 6 months after Helena Duarte Martins vanished, the case had grown cold. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa was reviewing the meager evidence file when his phone rang. A bakery employee in Cambuí had reported something unusual. A woman matching Helena's description had entered the establishment the previous afternoon. "She seemed disoriented," explained Fernanda, the bakery worker who made the call. "Her hair was different, shorter and darker, but I'm almost certain it was her." According to Fernanda, the woman had frantically asked to use the telephone, glancing repeatedly toward the door, as if terrified someone might follow her inside. The detective arrived at the bakery within 20 minutes. Security cameras had captured only a partial image, a woman with her head down, wearing oversized clothes that concealed her frame. Before completing her call, she'd suddenly looked toward the window and fled without explanation, leaving the phone dangling off the hook. Teresa Duarte clutched her daughter's photograph when Mauricio showed her the grainy footage. "That's her walk," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The way she holds her shoulders, that's my Helena." For the Martins family, this sighting ignited a desperate hope. If Helena was alive and trying to reach out, perhaps she could still be saved. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio, still under the shadow of suspicion, organized search parties throughout Cambuí and surrounding neighborhoods. The civil engineer spent every evening distributing flyers with Helena's image, his once confident demeanor now replaced by exhaustion. The police canvassed the area, interviewing shop owners and residents. Several reported seeing a black sedan circling the block shortly before the bakery incident, but no one had noted the license plate. Eduardo Alves, Helena's ex-boyfriend, volunteered to help with the search, though his awkward manner raised eyebrows among Helena's friends. Marcelo Cunha, always the supportive family friend, comforted Teresa while organizing community support. "We won't give up until she's home," he assured the grieving mother, his arm around her shoulders as news cameras captured his apparent compassion. But despite the momentary surge of activity, the trail quickly went cold again. The phone call had been too brief to trace, and without security footage from surrounding streets, the police couldn't track where the woman had gone after leaving the establishment. As weeks passed with no further sightings, the initial burst of optimism faded. The city's collective anxiety deepened. Campinas residents began locking doors they'd once left open, eyeing strangers with newfound suspicion. The mystery of the missing bride had transformed from a tragic news story into something more unsettling, a reminder that even in familiar places, surrounded by trusted faces, safety was never guaranteed. A year into the investigation, the case that had gripped Campinas took a dramatic turn. Security footage from a gas station on the old road to Valinhos surfaced, showing a black sedan passing through at 3 in the morning. The timestamp read exactly 1 year after Helena Duarte Martins had vanished. What caught investigators' attention wasn't just the timing, but the glimpse of a woman with long hair in the passenger seat. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa reviewed the grainy footage repeatedly, his tired eyes searching for details others might miss. The vehicle bore a striking resemblance to Ricardo Menezes Sampaio's car, the same model, color, and even what appeared to be a similar dent on the rear bumper. "This could be our first real lead in months," he told his team, ordering an enhancement of the video. When the news broke, it spread through Campinas like wildfire. The city that had been slowly trying to move on from the tragedy was suddenly thrust back into speculation and suspicion. Ricardo, who had been living in relative seclusion, found himself once again at the center of public scrutiny. "That's not my automobile," he insisted when confronted with the footage. "I was home that night. Alone, yes, but I was home." The community that had once stood united in concern for Helena now fractured along lines of loyalty. At Café Brasilia in downtown Campinas, heated debates replaced casual conversation. Those who had known Helena since childhood couldn't believe Ricardo would harm her, while others pointed to the mounting circumstantial evidence. "I've known Ricardo's family for 20 years, argued Carlos Mendez, a local business owner. "This is a mistake or a setup." Teresa Duarte, Helena's mother, viewed the footage with trembling hands. "If that's my daughter in that car, then she might still be alive," she whispered, hope and fear battling in her voice. The investigation team split into factions as well. Junior officers pushed to bring Ricardo in for formal questioning, while Mauricio urged caution. "We need more than just a similar vehicle," he warned. "We need proof." Meanwhile, Eduardo Alves watched the developments from afar, his own complicated feelings about his ex-girlfriend making him both a concerned observer and a person still under mild suspicion. As tensions rose, Marcelo Cunha positioned himself as a mediator between the divided groups, organizing a community meeting at Igreja do Carmo. "We cannot let this tragedy tear apart our community," he announced, his voice steady and reassuring. "Whether you believe Ricardo is innocent or guilty, we all want the same thing, to find Helena." What no one realized was how carefully Marcelo was watching their reactions, measuring their convictions, and calculating his next move. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Teresa Duarte discovered a folder of emails in Helena's personal computer while sorting through her daughter's belongings. What she found sent chills down her spine. Dozens of threatening messages sent to Helena Duarte Martins in the 3 months leading up to her wedding day. "You don't deserve happiness with him," read one message. "Your perfect day will never come," warned another. The emails escalated in their menacing tone as the wedding date approached, with the final one sent just 2 days before Helena vanished. "Soon you'll understand that some vows were never meant to be spoken." Teresa immediately handed the device over to Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa, who assembled a team of digital forensics experts. The messages had been sent through various temporary accounts, showing a level of technological sophistication that surprised the investigators. "Whoever sent these knew how to cover their tracks," Mauricio explained to the Martins family during a tense meeting at the precinct. But everyone makes mistakes eventually. The breakthrough came when analysts traced the IP addresses to an internet cafe in downtown Campinas, just 15 minutes from Novatec Sistemas where Helena worked. Security footage from the establishment revealed several regular customers during the timeframes when the emails were sent, but faces were difficult to identify due to the poor quality of the recordings. Ricardo was devastated when shown the contents of the messages. "I had no idea she was being threatened," he said, his voice breaking. "Why wouldn't she tell me?" The discovery only deepened his grief, while simultaneously shifting some public suspicion away from him. The existence of these communications transformed the investigation. What had been viewed as a possible runaway bride scenario or a crime of passion now appeared to be something more calculated. A stalking case that had escalated to abduction or worse. Mauricio ordered his team to cross-reference the Internet Cafe's customer records with people in Helena's social and professional circles. Someone was watching her, planning this for months, he told his colleagues at the 3rd Precinct. This wasn't impulsive. The messages also revealed intimate knowledge of Helena's daily routine and wedding plans, suggesting the sender was someone close to her, a friend, colleague, or acquaintance who harbored secret resentment. For the people of Campinas, the revelation of the threatening emails added another layer of unease, to the already troubling mystery. The thought that someone had methodically stalked the young bride before her disappearance made residents look at their neighbors with newfound suspicion. Who among them could harbor such darkness behind a friendly facade? 5 years had passed since Helena Duarte Martins vanished on what should have been her wedding day. The investigation had grown cold, with Ricardo Menezes Sampaio still living under a cloud of suspicion despite insufficient evidence to charge him. Then, a new lead emerged that would shift the focus of the entire case. Eduardo Alves, Helena's former boyfriend, had remained on the periphery of the investigation. Initially interviewed as a routine part of the process, he had been quickly dismissed as irrelevant. Now, Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa was reviewing old case files when something about Eduardo's original statement caught his attention. There was always something off about his alibi, Mauricio explained to his colleagues at the 3rd Police Precinct. He claimed to be at his mother's house in Taquaral, but phone records show his device was active near Cambuí around the time Helena disappeared. The detective arranged a follow-up interview with Eduardo. The man who arrived at the station was visibly nervous, fidgeting with his keys and avoiding eye contact. When questioned about his whereabouts on that November day, his story began to unravel. "I might have driven by her neighborhood," Eduardo admitted reluctantly. "I just wanted to see if she was really going through with it." His lingering resentment toward Helena became increasingly apparent as the interview progressed. Eduardo had never fully accepted their breakup 2 years before her engagement to Ricardo. Friends later revealed to investigators that he had often spoken bitterly about Helena trading up for someone with better prospects. "She always wanted the perfect life," Eduardo said during his 3rd hour of questioning, his voice tinged with bitterness. "The big house in Cambuí, the respectable husband, the whole package. I wasn't good enough." Teresa Duarte, upon learning about Eduardo's reemergence as a suspect, provided investigators with letters he had sent her daughter months after their breakup, correspondence Helena had kept hidden from Ricardo. "These aren't the words of someone who had moved on," Mauricio observed as he read through the increasingly desperate messages. The possibility of a love triangle gone tragically wrong now loomed large over the case. Had Eduardo's jealousy driven him to do something unthinkable, or was he another red herring in an investigation already full of false leads? As news spread through Campinas that the missing bride case had taken yet another turn, old relationships and buried secrets began surfacing. Former mutual friends of Helena and Eduardo came forward with stories of uncomfortable encounters and concerning behavior. The case that had once seemed straightforward had grown increasingly complex, with every new revelation raising more questions than answers. 7 years had passed since Helena Duarte Martins vanished on what should have been her wedding day. The case had grown cold, with most of Campinas having resigned themselves to never knowing the truth. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio remained the primary suspect in the public eye, his life in shambles after years of suspicion and isolation. Everything changed when the Campinas Forensic Department received new equipment capable of detecting previously invisible fingerprint residue. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa, who had never truly abandoned the case, immediately requested a re-examination of the evidence. The earring found in Ricardo's vehicle, Helena's favorite, was among the first items tested. "We found something," the lab technician told Mauricio, her voice tight with excitement. "There are 3 distinct fingerprint patterns on this piece of jewelry." The detective leaned forward, suddenly alert. 3? We expected Helena's and Ricardo's, but who's the 3rd? The prints didn't match anyone in the system, but their mere existence shattered the prevailing theory. If Ricardo had planted the earring to cover his tracks, why would an unknown third party have handled it? Mauricio called an emergency meeting at the 3rd Precinct. "This changes everything," he told his colleagues, spreading photographs across the table. "Someone else touched this earring, someone who's been invisible in our investigation for 7 years." The revelation breathed new life into the cold case. Mauricio began re-interviewing witnesses, this time looking for connections they might have missed. He sensed a pattern emerging, a shadowy presence that had manipulated evidence and testimonies from the beginning. It's like someone orchestrated this entire tragedy, he confided to Teresa Duarte during a difficult conversation at her home in Cambuí. Helena's mother clutched her cup of coffee, hope and fear battling in her eyes. "Are you saying Ricardo might be innocent?" she asked. "I'm saying there's more to this story than we've been led to believe," Mauricio replied carefully. The detective's superiors were skeptical about reopening such an old case, but the forensic evidence was impossible to ignore. Resources were reluctantly allocated, and Mauricio assembled a small team dedicated to pursuing this new lead. Late one night, reviewing security footage for the 100th time, he noticed something in the background of the video, showing the black sedan on the road to Valenos. A reflection in a storefront window revealed a third person in the back seat, someone who had never been mentioned in any report. "We've been played," Mauricio whispered to himself, the pieces finally starting to align. Someone's been pulling strings from the shadows all along. The detective didn't know it yet, but he had just taken the first step toward uncovering the truth about Helena's disappearance and the mastermind behind it all. Every November, Campinas fell into a somber rhythm. As the anniversary of Helena Duarte Martins' disappearance approached, the city collectively held its breath. Vigils at Igreja do Carmo grew larger each year, with hundreds of residents gathering to light candles and offer prayers for the woman who vanished on what should have been her happiest day. Teresa Duarte would stand at the front, her face weathered by grief, but her resolve unbroken. The mother clutched her daughter's framed photograph, the official portrait that had been meant for the wedding announcement. That same image now adorned social media pages with thousands of followers, all dedicated to the missing bride of Campinas. "Someone knows something," Teresa would whisper to anyone who would listen. "My daughter didn't simply vanish." Local news outlets revived the story annually, interviewing Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa, who remained stubbornly committed despite the case growing colder. The investigator never revealed his full hand to reporters, but his eyes betrayed a determination that hadn't dimmed with passing years. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio rarely attended these public remembrances. The engineer had become a shadow of himself, living in semi-isolation on the outskirts of the city. Neighbors reported seeing him walking alone at night, a man haunted by suspicion and loss. Online communities debated endlessly. Some users insisted Helena had fled willingly, while others constructed elaborate theories involving Eduardo Alves or unnamed criminal elements. Armchair detectives analyzed and reanalyzed every scrap of evidence, from the white shoe to the mysterious earring. "This case defines Campinas now," remarked a bakery owner near Cambuí. "Every bride who shops for her dress, it's that look. People wondering if she'll be the next to disappear." The community's collective memory transformed Helena from a person into a symbol of vulnerability, of justice delayed, of questions unanswered. Young women in the city spoke of pulling a Helena when joking about escaping uncomfortable situations, unaware of how deeply such casual references wounded those who had known her. Marcelo Cunha often organized memorial events, his apparent dedication to finding Helena earning him praise from unsuspecting community members. The family friend would speak eloquently about never giving up hope, all while carefully monitoring any new developments in the case. For a city that prided itself on family values and tradition, Helena's unresolved fate remained an open wound, a reminder that even in familiar surroundings, terrible mysteries could unfold. Her absence hung over Campinas like the heavy November air, permeating every aspect of local life and refusing to dissipate, even as years turned into a decade. A decade had passed since Helena Duarte Martins vanished on what should have been her wedding day. The case had grown cold, becoming an uncomfortable footnote in Campina's collective memory. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. A street vendor named Paulo approached the 3rd Police Precinct with information he had kept to himself for 10 years. On that fateful November day, he had been setting up his fruit stand on the old road to Valinhos when he noticed a black sedan parked at an unusual angle. A man emerged, carrying something in his hands, before disappearing into the brush. Hours later, the same man returned, alone, looking nervous before driving away. I didn't think much of it until I saw the news about the shoe being found there, Paulo explained to Mauricio Ferreira Costa. The man looked familiar, like someone from her circle. The detective listened intently as Paulo described the man. Medium height, well-dressed, with a distinctive way of walking. When shown photographs, Paulo pointed without hesitation to Marcelo Cunha. "That's him, I'm certain," the vendor said. Mauricio felt a chill run down his spine. Marcelo had been a fixture in the investigation from the beginning, consoling Teresa Duarte, supporting Ricardo Menezes Sampaio during questioning, even organizing search parties. Yet somehow, he had never been considered a suspect. The detective began quietly re-examining every statement Marcelo had given over the years. He discovered subtle inconsistencies, times that didn't align, locations that couldn't be verified. Most damning was Marcelo's insistence that he had been at a business meeting when Helena disappeared, yet no one from that supposed meeting could confirm his presence. "He's been hiding in plain sight," Mauricio told his partner, as they reviewed security footage from businesses near the road to Valinhos. "Look at how he positions himself in every situation, close enough to know everything, but never close enough to raise suspicion." The investigation team began surveillance of Marcelo, noting his frequent drives past Helena's family home in Cambuí and his occasional visits to the spot where the white shoe had been discovered. His behavior grew increasingly erratic as the surveillance continued. When questioned about his whereabouts on casual occasions, Marcelo's answers became defensive. "Why are you suddenly interested in where I was 10 years ago?" he asked Mauricio during a seemingly innocent conversation at a local cafe. The net was tightening. For the first time in a decade, Mauricio felt they were closing in on the truth. The trusted friend who had comforted the family, who had stood beside Ricardo in his darkest hours, was now at the center of the investigation. The missing bride of Campinas might finally get justice. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa spread the case files across his cluttered desk at the 3rd Police Precinct. After 10 years of dead ends, the pieces were finally coming together, revealing a disturbing pattern of manipulation. The evidence against Ricardo Menezes Sampaio had always seemed too convenient, almost staged. "Someone wanted us to look at Ricardo, and no one else," Mauricio muttered to himself as he examined photographs of the white shoe and earring. The detective had spent months re-examining every piece of evidence, noticing inconsistencies that had been overlooked. The fingerprints on Helena's earring didn't match Ricardo's, yet somehow it had appeared in his vehicle months after her disappearance. The detective's phone rang. It was the mayor's office, again. "We need this case resolved, Ferreira," the voice demanded. "It's been a decade. The city needs closure." Mauricio gripped the receiver tightly. "I'm close to the truth. I need more time." The political pressure was mounting. Campinas had carried the weight of the missing bride case for too long, and officials wanted it concluded, regardless of whether justice was served. The detective understood their position, but refused to compromise his investigation. That evening, Mauricio revisited the security footage showing the black sedan on the road to Valinhos. He noticed something he'd missed before. The driver briefly turned toward the camera, revealing a profile that didn't match Ricardo's features. The next morning, he interviewed former colleagues of Helena from Novatech Sistemas. One remembered seeing Marcelo Cunha near Helena's desk several times before her disappearance, always when she wasn't present. "He seemed to be looking for something," the coworker recalled. "I thought he was just delivering messages from the family." Mauricio's suspicions deepened when he discovered that the threatening emails sent to Helena had been traced to an internet cafe just 2 blocks from Marcelo's apartment. The timing of Marcelo's appearances at key locations formed a pattern too precise to be coincidental. The detective faced resistance from his superiors when he proposed shifting the investigation's focus. "You want to investigate a family friend instead of the fiancé?" his captain questioned incredulously. But Mauricio stood firm. "The evidence has been manipulated from the beginning. Someone planted that earring. Someone made sure we'd find that shoe. Someone wanted us looking at Ricardo while they covered their tracks." Despite warnings about his career and public backlash, Mauricio continued building his case. He knew that Helena's family deserved the truth, not a convenient conclusion. Teresa Duarte had waited 10 years for answers about her daughter. He wouldn't fail her now. The web of deception was unraveling, and at its center, Mauricio increasingly found one name: Marcelo Cunha. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio stared at the cracked ceiling of his rented apartment in the outskirts of Campinas. The once respected civil engineer now lived at a space barely larger than a storage unit. 13 years had passed since Helena disappeared. 13 years since his life had shattered like glass beneath a hammer. The engineer who had once overseen major projects now couldn't find work beyond occasional consulting gigs. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. His family name, once synonymous with tradition and integrity in Campinas, had become tainted by whispers and accusations. "There goes the man who made his bride vanish," people would murmur as he passed. When Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa knocked on his door that rainy Tuesday morning, Ricardo expected another round of the same questions that had haunted him for over a decade. Instead, the weary-eyed investigator brought something unexpected: evidence suggesting someone had deliberately planted the earring in his vehicle. "Someone wanted you to look guilty," Mauricio explained, his voice steady but compassionate. "We found trace evidence indicating the earring was handled by a third party before being placed in your glove compartment." Ricardo collapsed into his threadbare armchair, tears streaming down his unshaven face. For years, he had maintained his innocence while watching his life disintegrate. His parents had died believing their son might be a murderer. His friends had abandoned him one by one. Even Helena's mother, Teresa, who had once welcomed him into her home like a son, couldn't look him in the eye anymore. "Who would do this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from years of defending himself against invisible accusers. The detective placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're closing in on answers, but I needed you to know, we no longer consider you a suspect." The words brought a hollow victory. Ricardo's reputation lay in ruins, his career destroyed, his spirit nearly broken. The bittersweet relief of vindication couldn't restore 13 years of isolation and suspicion. That night, Ricardo walked through Cambuí for the first time in years. He passed the bakery where he and Helena had chosen their wedding cake, the park where they had planned their future. Some older residents still glared, their judgment calcified by years of gossip. But he stood straighter now, carrying the small ember of his reclaimed innocence. Back in his apartment, he found an old photograph of Helena. "I never stopped looking for you," he whispered to her smiling image. "And I never will." The years of suffering had marked him permanently. But for the first time since that November day, Ricardo allowed himself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The interrogation room at the 3rd Police Precinct felt smaller than usual as Eduardo Alves sat across from Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa. After 12 hours of questioning, Eduardo's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his face as he buried his head in his hands. "I never wanted to hurt her," Eduardo whispered. "I thought I was protecting Helena." The detective leaned forward, his weary eyes fixed on the man who had been a suspect for years. "Tell me everything," he said, sliding a cup of water across the table. Eduardo revealed how, in the months before Helena Duarte Martin's wedding, he had received a series of anonymous messages. The sender claimed Helena was in danger, that Ricardo Menezes Sampaio was abusive behind closed doors. The messages contained intimate details only someone close to Helena would know. "I was told to plant false information, to create confusion," Eduardo explained, his voice breaking. "The messages said it would give Helena time to escape from Ricardo." What Eduardo didn't know was that Marcelo Cunha, a trusted friend to both families, had orchestrated everything. Marcelo had accessed Helena's personal information through his friendship with the Martins family, using these details to manipulate Eduardo's lingering feelings for his ex-girlfriend. "I planted the earring in Ricardo's car," Eduardo confessed. "Marcelo gave it to me, said Helena had left it as evidence. I believed him because I wanted to believe Ricardo was the villain." Detective Mauricio carefully documented each admission. The confession explained several inconsistencies that had plagued the investigation for years. "Did you ever meet with Marcelo directly about this?" the detective asked. "No, everything was through messages or drops at the internet cafe in Centro," Eduardo replied. "He was careful. I never suspected it was him." When shown photographs of text messages recovered from Marcelo's hidden devices, Eduardo's face paled. "These are exactly like what I received. It was him all along." Eduardo's confession spread through Campinas like wildfire. At cafes and shops throughout the city, residents expressed disbelief that someone as seemingly supportive as Marcelo could engineer such an elaborate deception. For Teresa Duarte, Eduardo's confession brought complicated emotions. While it exonerated a man she had long blamed, it also confirmed the betrayal by someone she had trusted to help find her daughter. The confession marked a turning point in the investigation. Eduardo was cleared of direct involvement in Helena's disappearance, though he faced lesser charges for evidence tampering. More importantly, it provided Detective Mauricio with the final pieces needed to close the net around the true architect of the tragedy that had haunted Campinas for 13 years. The interrogation room at the 3rd Police Precinct felt smaller than usual as Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa laid out 13 years of evidence across the metal table. Photographs, reports, and forensic analyses formed a damning timeline that all pointed to one man, Marcelo Cunha. "We have your fingerprints on Helena's earring," Mauricio said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion of a case that had consumed over a decade of his life. "The same earring you helped plant in Ricardo's car." Marcelo's composed facade began to crack. The family friend who had comforted Teresa Duarte at vigils, who had stood beside Ricardo during the darkest days of suspicion, now sat cornered by his own elaborate deception. "It was never supposed to go this far," Marcelo finally whispered, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The detective leaned forward. "Tell me what happened that day." The confession spilled out like poison from a wound. Marcelo had harbored feelings for Helena for years, watching from the periphery as she built a life with Ricardo. His resentment festered into obsession, culminating in an elaborate plan to sabotage their relationship. "I intercepted her on the way to the dress fitting," he admitted. "Told her Ricardo needed to see her urgently. She trusted me completely." The detective's pen scratched against his notepad as Marcelo detailed how he'd manufactured evidence against Ricardo, anonymously threatened Helena, and manipulated Eduardo into becoming an unwitting accomplice. "I just wanted her to see Ricardo wasn't right for her," Marcelo said, his voice hollow. "But she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't even consider." His voice trailed off, unable to justify the 13 years of anguish he'd caused. Outside the interrogation room, the news spread quickly through Campinas. Neighbors who had speculated over coffee, friends who had chosen sides, and strangers who had followed the case online all reeled from the revelation. The betrayal cut deeper because Marcelo had been trusted, welcomed into homes, included in the most intimate moments of both families. For Ricardo, the confirmation of his innocence came too late to salvage the life he'd once known. For Teresa, the truth about her daughter's fate reopened wounds that had never fully healed. As Marcelo was led away in handcuffs, Detective Mauricio gathered his files with methodical care. The case that had defined his career was closing, but the community's recovery was just beginning. Trust, once shattered, would take far longer to rebuild than the 13 years spent searching for answers. After 13 years of uncertainty, the full truth of Helena Duarte Martins' fate emerged like a nightmare from which Campinas could not awaken. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa pieced together the horrifying reality through Marcelo Cunha's confession and evidence collected from a remote property outside Valinhos. Helena had never intended to flee her wedding. On that November day, while heading to her final dress fitting, she received an urgent message from Marcelo claiming Ricardo Menezes Sampaio was in trouble. Concerned, she met him at an arranged location where he drugged her and transported her to an isolated farmhouse. For nearly 2 years, Helena was kept in captivity. The administrative assistant who once organized everyone's lives at Novatech Sistemas became a prisoner in a soundproofed room, her world reduced to 4 walls and Marcelo's manipulative presence. He created an elaborate fiction, convincing her that Ricardo had orchestrated her abduction and that the outside world believed she had abandoned everyone. He showed me newspaper clippings calling me the runaway bride Helena had written in a journal recovered from the property. He said my family had disowned me, that Ricardo had turned them against me. The psychological torment was calculated and relentless. Marcelo would disappear for days, leaving her dependent on his return for food and human contact. He occasionally drove her past familiar places at night, just close enough to see but never to be seen, reinforcing her isolation while keeping her connected to a life she could no longer reach. The bakery sighting reported years earlier had indeed been Helena. During a rare trip outside, she had managed to slip away briefly, desperate to call for help. But Marcelo had found her before she could make contact, and the punishment that followed ensured she never tried again. Teresa Duarte collapsed when shown her daughter's recovered possessions, a silver bracelet she had given Helena for her 25th birthday, now tarnished from years of wear, and the journal documenting her daughter's fading hope. Medical examiners determined Helena had died approximately 4 years after her abduction from untreated pneumonia, a condition Marcelo had dismissed as merely a cold. Her remains were found buried on the property, marked only by a small stone. The city that had whispered about the missing bride for over a decade now faced the unbearable truth. Helena hadn't abandoned her life. Her life had been stolen from her by someone they had all trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone could have imagined, leaving a community to question how well they truly knew those around them. In the wake of this revelation, Campinas mourned not just for Helena, but for the collective innocence lost when the monster was revealed to be not a stranger, but a friend. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Marcelo Cunha, once a trusted friend to both families, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the kidnapping and death of Helena Duarte Martins. His face remained expressionless as the gavel struck, finalizing 13 years of deception and betrayal. The citizens of Campinas, who packed the courtroom, exhaled collectively, a community's long-held breath finally released. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio sat with his head bowed, tears streaming down his face. After years of suspicion, isolation, and lost opportunities, his name was officially cleared. The judge had made a point to publicly acknowledge his innocence, but Ricardo knew that paper declarations couldn't rebuild a shattered life. His engineering career had withered under the weight of suspicion, and former colleagues still averted their eyes when they passed him on the streets of Cambuí. "It's over," Teresa Duarte whispered, clutching a photograph of her daughter. The mother's face showed the deep lines carved by 13 years of uncertainty. While the truth had finally emerged, Teresa found that closure remained elusive. Knowing Helena's fate brought a strange mixture of relief and renewed grief, the pain of loss now concrete rather than suspended in terrible uncertainty. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa, hailing him as the hero who never gave up. The detective's responses were measured, his eyes revealing the exhaustion of a man who had carried the weight of this case for over a decade. This was never about recognition, he told the gathered press. This was about justice for Helena and peace for her family. The investigation had taken its toll on Mauricio. His marriage had dissolved under the pressure of long hours and obsessive dedication. Colleagues noticed how his once black hair had turned almost completely gray during the final year of the investigation. Yet when asked if he regretted his commitment to the case, the detective simply shook his head. In the days following the trial, the Martins family held a proper memorial service at Igreja do Carmo. The church overflowed with mourners, some who had known Helena personally, others who had followed her story through the years. Ricardo attended, standing at a respectful distance from the family that had once nearly become his own. Justice had been served, but at an immeasurable cost. 3 families destroyed, the Martins by loss, Ricardo's by suspicion, and Marcelo's by truth. As Campinas began to process the resolution of its most haunting mystery, the reality remained that some wounds, once inflicted, could never truly heal. They could only be acknowledged and carried forward. In the aftermath of the trial, Teresa Duarte found herself wandering through her daughter's old bedroom each morning, fingers tracing the framed photographs that captured Helena's radiant smile. The pain remained, a constant companion, but Teresa gradually discovered that helping others provided a pathway through grief that solitude could not. "My daughter's story shouldn't end with her tragedy," Teresa told a group of anxious parents at the community center. Near Igreja do Carmo, she had transformed her anguish into purpose, establishing a support network for families of missing persons throughout Campinas and neighboring cities. Her living room, once filled with unanswered questions, now housed case files, contact information, and resources for those experiencing the same nightmare she had endured for 13 years. Across town, Ricardo Menezes Sampaio faced his own journey toward healing. The former engineer, once the most promising young professional in his field, now lived with the ghosts of false accusations. Though legally exonerated, the whispers followed him through the streets of Cambuí. Yet like Teresa, he found redemption in service, volunteering 3 days a week at an organization helping those who had been wrongfully accused. "When the entire city believes you're guilty," he explained to a man recently cleared of charges, "you lose more than your reputation, you lose yourself." The civil engineer spoke from experience, his once confident demeanor now tempered by years of isolation and suspicion. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa maintained contact with both Teresa and Ricardo, occasionally joining them for coffee at the bakery where Helena had once desperately sought help. The weary investigator had refused numerous promotions, preferring to remain close to the cases that needed his meticulous attention. "Some wounds never fully heal," Mauricio observed during one such meeting, "but they can strengthen us in unexpected ways." The city itself seemed to breathe differently now. Parents in Taquaral kept closer watch on their children. Neighbors in Cambuí paid more attention to unusual behaviors. The tragedy had taught Campinas that danger often wore a familiar face. Teresa established an annual memorial walk that traced Helena's last known movements, ending at the courthouse where Marcelo had finally faced justice. Each year, the crowd grew larger, lanterns illuminating the night as citizens reclaimed spaces once darkened by fear. "My daughter wanted to build a life here," Teresa would say at each gathering, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Instead, She taught us all to look more carefully at the lives we've already built. The story of Helena Duarte Martins became woven into the fabric of Campinas itself. In cafes along the tree-lined streets of Cambuí, patrons would lower their voices when discussing the missing bride case. At Sunday gatherings after Mass at Igreja do Carmo, older residents would recount the 13-year mystery to newcomers, each telling adding another layer to the city's collective memory. Trust your instincts, mothers would tell their daughters, referencing how Helena's disappearance went uninvestigated for too long. The case transformed how the community viewed relationships, encouraging people to look beyond surface appearances. Marcelo Cunha's betrayal had shattered the assumption that danger only came from strangers. Teresa Duarte channeled her grief into creating a support network for families of missing persons. Her organization, operating from a small office near the 3rd Police Precinct, helped dozens of families navigate the bureaucratic maze of missing persons investigations. She often said that finding purpose had been her salvation after losing her daughter. Ricardo Menezes Sampaio eventually left Campinas, the weight of false accusations and painful memories too heavy to bear. He returned only once a year to place flowers at Helena's memorial in the city garden. Though exonerated, the engineer carried the scars of suspicion that had marked 13 years of his life. Eduardo Alves found redemption through honesty, volunteering to speak at schools about the dangers of manipulation and the importance of coming forward with the truth, no matter how delayed. His testimony had been crucial in finally bringing justice for Helena. Detective Mauricio Ferreira Costa became something of a local legend. Though he retired 2 years after solving the case, his methodical approach to the investigation was studied by new officers at the precinct. "The truth doesn't expire," he would tell them during occasional training sessions. "It waits to be discovered." The black sedan, the white shoe, the earring with the 3rd set of fingerprints, these items took on almost mythical significance in local lore. They represented both the fragility of evidence and its enduring power to reveal truth. On the 13th anniversary of Helena's disappearance, the same year the case was finally solved, the city installed a small plaque in the municipal garden. It bore no dramatic inscription, just her name and the words that Mauricio had made famous throughout Campinas. "No matter how long it takes, the truth will always find its way." In a city that had witnessed both the darkest aspects of human nature and the relentless pursuit of justice, Helena's story remained a somber reminder that behind every disappearance lies not just a mystery, but a human life worthy of remembrance.